Alright guys, so I'm going to go over the level up part of it, which is arrays, loops, and functions. And after that, I'll jump into where you guys can kind of just play around with it locally on y'all's computers. So then for arrays, an array stores multiple values in one single variable. We kind of went over that last week when we were mentioning variable types, which if you try to do like a type of a variable that holds an array, it'll say an array type. So an array is special variable which can hold more than one value at a time. If you have like this example of, like cars, for example, you could potentially set it up this way, so you'd have three variables, one being different, or each one being different. So you have cars 1, cars 2, cars 3. Of course, there's not an array. It's just these are multiple values, and to hold it all together with an array, you would use the array brackets, or the term array with a parentheses. You'd wrap that into that. I want to push you guys to use the brackets. I know online when you look up a lot of examples, you're going to see array. The brackets is going to be very helpful when you switch over to JavaScript. It'll make a lot of sense, and also other languages that you might want to dig into will also use that. So that's really helpful to use. And this is the same example as before, but just convert it into an array. So you have the variable cars, and now those three string text values are inside of an array. So the first type of array are called index. So it's an indexed array. Basically here in this example, they're just text strings inside of it. There's nothing else around them, and automatically PHP will index them for you starting at 0. So you could actually run something like echo and then a variable, and then within a brackets you can say the integer value of that index. So here, can anybody guess what it would echo out?
So 0, 1, 2.
Mm-hmm. So it would say Toyota. Yeah, Toyota. It would say Toyota there.
For 2, yeah.
Yeah. So it throws. So the integer will always throw you off because you're always thinking 1, 2, but 0 is always the starting integer when it automatically indexes for you. An associative. Oh shoot! Hold on. Let me see. I think I have this one. Yeah, an associative array is basically you name the keys, or you name the index of each item. So similar example, you have an array, and instead of just having text strings as values, you actually assign a key to it. And in here, the key is a string, and we're saying like mark, and then we're setting a value to it. So it's an integer value of 23. So we do that for those these 3 items, and this would actually output what the second item, which would be 35. So here you can.
So this would be replacing the default number sequencing.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no like
0,
automatically.
1, 2 is gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, it is gone. So you could, in this case, be like ages 0, and it would show up?
No, it
No.
would do nothing. It'd be
Well,
an
right.
error, wouldn't it?
I think depending on the PHP
Okay.
type, but it should be like empty. It would probably just show either null or empty something, or maybe depending on the how strict that environment you're in, might throw you a warning or something like that, like it doesn't exist, something like that, or undefined or something like that. So yeah, but yeah, so here you can actually call out specific keys within an array if it's an associative array. And then you have a multi-dimensional array, which is basically you're containing one or more arrays within the array. So you can nest them, essentially. So PHP understands when this happens. And then in this example, I have the variable called people, and then 3 arrays within it. And since each one's an array, I can actually hold an associative array within it in this example. But it could be also an indexed array as well. So it could be anytime. This is just an example of arrays within an array. Here, actually, though, if you can see when I'm trying to echo out the first element or the first array, I actually have to use the index version because I'm not assigning a key to it. So by default, automatically PHP will index it, all the arrays, and then within it, since it's an associative array, then I can call the key specifically.
So the names Mark, Marie, and George would be 0, 1, and 2.
Right, exactly. Yes, the arrays, yes, they would be, yes. That pretty clear. I don't want to go too fast, too. I'm going fast. But yeah, so that's multi-dimensional arrays. And it can get really deep. I mean, you can get crazy with this stuff, especially when it comes with a big data set. It can get pretty intense. So there's nothing compared to what you'll probably be seeing in bigger projects. So if we wanted to display this multi-dimensional array in a page, for example, that actually displays all this this information that's contained in this array, we could do this. We could echo out every index version of it. Do you guys think that's a good idea to do something like that?
Time-wise, no.
Right.
So some kind of
Time
loop
is good.
would be,
Yes.
yeah.
A loop would be good, but writing it, time. It's going to take a lot. I mean, right now I just fit 3 because of, to explain, but arrays typically will be hundreds or thousands. So yeah. So time wise, it'll take a while. What about development wise? If you're another developer and a team member created this, would that be helpful to you when you're reading this? Are you gonna find George? Is it easy to find where specifically he would be listed at, right? Because these index are automatic. They're automatically assigned by PHP. So saying 2 doesn't say George. It's just as you're writing it and you echo it, then oh, 2 is George, right? You can also write a comment and say this is George, but it's not. I mean, that's also helpful, but again, not productive. So definitely not something you should do. And then, just like Jim said, loops are the solution to doing something like that. And so basically, PHP loops execute a block of code a specified number of times. So you have a block of code that you just want to run every single time. And oftentimes when you write code, you want the same block of code to run over and over again in a row instead of adding several almost equal code lines in a script. We can use loops to perform a task like this. So there's same thing like a lot of things. There's different types of loops. So this one, since y'all have been working with WordPress, you're going to see this a lot, the while loop. And it's basically just runs as long as the condition is true for that amount of time. So in this example, I have x equals 1. The variable x has the value, the integer 1. And you can run while, and then there has to be a condition. So the condition here is x less than or equal to 5? If so, then, and in this example, I echo out the value of x. And then that next line, I'm incrementing the value of x. So in that first iteration that it went through, 1 then became 2, and then it runs it again. So now, while x is less than or equal to 5, the answer would be 2, and then just keeps incrementing, and then of course until it's 5, that would be the last iteration. So that's the while loop. This is just so you can visually see the output of that. So it just goes 1 through 5. And then also, you can, instead of using the braces, you can actually use colon and then end it with end while. And this is also, you'll see this a lot in WordPress templates. They use this almost every time. So that's an alternative way of doing that. You can also do this with conditions. So you can say if, and then your condition, a colon, and then to close it out, instead of using the braces, you can actually use and if. So that's a while loop. Then there's a do and then while loop. So loops through a block of code once and then repeats the loop as long as the specified condition is true. So the thing to note here is that it's going to run the first one no matter what. So it's not checking any condition until after it finishes the first loop, and then it checks for a condition. So in this case, I have x equals 1. It'll echo out numbers 1, and then adds or it increments it. So now the condition is x less than or equal to 5. So that first condition will actually be 2 in that case. So it just keeps running through that. So of course, if we run that, you would see this because it ran the first one and it keeps going. But if we change the value x equals to 6, it would run it. So it's 6, but then the following ones are false. So it ends there. I personally don't use this. I don't know. I don't think I've ever found a time to use it. I'm sure there probably will be a project someday, but definitely not a popular or one that you would use. For me, would be the for each, which I'll go after this for loop one. So the for loop one is loops through the block of code a specified number of times. The for loop is used when you know in advance how many times the script should run. So there's 3 parameters or arguments here that make up the for loop. So it's the init value, the test value, and then the increment value. So the initial loop counter value is basically like a variable that you hold with a specific value in there. And all the examples that you'll find online is probably x equals 0. And then you have the condition there. Same thing like you saw previously in the what do you call it? The while loops, which is the value less than or equal to or less than a certain value. In this case, as an example, is 10. And then notice that they're all separated by a semicolon, so you're ending the statement every single time. And then the last parameter there is how you increment it. So that way it just keeps going, essentially. Let's see, I have an example of that. So if we were to run that code and we set it the first initial value to 0, and then you have the condition to be less than or equal to 10, it would do that. So the first one is equals to 0, but then after it finishes your statement, so my only block of code is to echo the value, that's the end of it, then it runs that last iteration of incrementing it. So then now it would keep adding 0, or it would keep incrementing the value of x. So it keeps going, and then of course until the condition ends, or is not true anymore, that's when it'll stop.
So if you set x to 0, you have to remember that if you put it to 10, if you set it to 10, it will run 11 times total.
If you set it to 10,
because that has 1 to 10, but since you started at 0 and you're adding 1 each time, you would run it 11 times.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and then same. I would say you would see this a lot also in JavaScript, and that's why I keep saying like PHP and JavaScript are very similar, and so learning one is going to help you learn the other. But same here, or same in my experience, this is also one that you don't use often. It's not very often you use it.
It's harder to read. It's not as legible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You have to really understand these, use them all the time. But yes, I totally agree that you have to focus, right? You have to focus to see what you're looking at. So that's the for loop. And then this one's the one that I use all the time. It's a for each loop, and it works only on arrays, and is used to loop through each key value pair in an array. For every loop iteration, the value of the current array element is assigned to value, and the array pointer is moved by 1 until it reaches the last element. So I guess the structure of it is you would say the term for each, and then in parentheses you would put in the array variable name. And then also another keyword there is as, so you're saying this array as, and then you specify a value name. This value name is something you make up within this loop. So it's not created before the loop. You're basically stating like I'm gonna label every single element within this array to this thing, and this example is value. And then it just keeps running through that array until the array is complete. So an example of that is I'm saying color. The array variable name is colors, and the array is red, green, and blue text strings. So I'm saying for each colors as value, echo value. So there I could also say for each colors as color, or for each colors as row. You can change that name of the value to anything you want. Also keep note though, when you do this, if you do have a variable before that, so if I actually had a variable called value above it, it's going to replace that value because you labeled it that. So that's another thing to note. When you see you had a variable, a global variable you set somewhere in your page, it could be like maybe, I don't know, like 50 lines above it, because you won't see it when you're editing this loop, and then you label it the same, you'll accidentally overwrite it. So that's one thing to keep note when you're writing these loops.
So later on, if you refer to that global variable, it's gonna be confused. It's gonna think.
Well, you're gonna overwrite it. You're gonna overwrite it. Yeah, exactly. So to you, when you see information come out, and then when you're like printing out the original one, the one that you originally set, and you echo it out somehow, and you see like, oh, it's the value of this other loop thing that I created. That's when you're like, oh, okay, I use the same variable name. I should call it something different. So here, that's where you kind of should get creative of labeling something, or just making sure that there's no other variable name above it or outside of it.
If I put value in another for each statement, so it wasn't a global variable, but I had value in two different for each statements, would those get confused at some point?
They should, yeah, they should, yeah. So one of the things that I've done is like here, I guess it should have been color, right? So colors as color, because it's more, you're gonna state like a singular type term. But let's say you want to reuse color in another loop. Here, maybe this for each statement is to display, I don't know, like some boxes or something. Maybe you want to call it color box or something like that, because you know this loop will just display boxes with different colors. And then that's where you can set a different name. But yeah, it'll connect them once you state them. So that's just another example of of it outputting the same example as earlier. Red, green, blue. And I'm going to jump into functions, but how are we looking on loops? So far, so good? Okay. Yeah, so then the next thing is functions. Functions help organize and group statements of code. That's really the essence of it. Like you're going to write all this code, and the best way is to organize. You always should find a way to organize it, whether it's separating PHP files, but even within a PHP file, if you want to, they're all linked together somehow. So using functions is helpful. So besides the built-in PHP functions, we can find you can create your own functions. A function is a block of statements that can be used repeatedly in a program. A function will not execute immediately when a page loads. A function will be executed by call function. So yeah, once you write a function and you don't call it, it won't run. So basically, it's just a block of code in the page that's not doing anything. So I found this thing that's like a coffee analogy. So if you had a coffee pot that obviously makes coffee, but if it was to be a function, it would be make coffee. That would be the function name. And then you would need water and coffee beans. That's what it would require. And then within your function, you would tell it to heat up the water and then pour the hot water onto the coffee beans. And then, of course, there's a filter underneath it, so that way it filters out. And the function would then return coffee to you. So I thought that was a cool analogy of it. And then how to define a function is basically writing the term function. And for example, here you have hello world. And then you wrap it with parentheses. And then the little braces there. That's all it is. And then you have your block of code inside of it. So you can. This is just one simple echo line, but a real function will have a lot more things in there. And then how to call a function after you created your function, then you would just write the term or the function name, and then the parentheses to actually call it out. And that would actually execute your function. It would do whatever you tell it to do. And this is just an example of that. So that example of like water and coffee beans are essentially the arguments of the function. It's something that you need for the function to run. So information can be passed to a function through arguments. An argument is just like a variable. Arguments are specified after the function name. Inside the parentheses, you can add as many arguments as you want, just separate them with the comma. So in this example, you have family name as a function. I have a variable or an argument that's called fname, which would be like first name. And then the block of code within it would be to echo out the first name and automatically add the term Solis to it, like the last name. So something like this, where we run the function multiple times with different first names, it would echo out like that. That's the way it would show up. That variable name or that argument is contained within it. It's not going to take a global variable there. So there, you actually have to run the function and assign the argument value there. That's how it's not, so if you had the variable fname outside of it, it's a different scope, so it's not going to know what you predefined in the global variable. And then here in these examples, they're just text strings. Then, like I said earlier, you can have multiple arguments. You can have as many as you want. So just to kind of extend that example, I added the an argument called year, which would be a year, and I'm adding some text to it. So it'll say first name, or the variable first name, and then add Solis born in, and then the second variable or argument, which would be year. And if I run it 5 times with those examples, it would give you an example like that. That makes sense? Another example, if we had a function called photo thumb, maybe we want to have images that have a dynamic width. So the variable or the argument name would make sense if we called it width. The argument name is obviously helpful when you have other team members working on the same project, so that way you know what to fill it in with. Also, if you don't there's also ways to develop where you want to shorten variable names. You can get crazy of calling it X. That's not super helpful for someone, but maybe you call it WID or something, or I don't know. Just you shorten the argument name. You can always use commenting above it to explain what these arguments should be and maybe what type. So here the argument name is width, and then I'm echoing an image tag that will output the value of that argument inside the image tag. And then there's 2 examples there of running that, that function. And if you notice, one has a value for the argument, the other one doesn't. So you can see in this example that the first one outputs it, the second one is just empty. There's no error, there's nothing wrong, it's just nothing. To solve that, you can actually set a default value to your argument. So you can say width equals to anything you want. And in that case, if you rerun the same example I said earlier, you would actually see a value in the second iteration by default. That's helpful, again, when there might not be a value, and you just want it to say something, that way it doesn't break. Maybe the design, you don't want it to break, so you have to have a default value there of something, and that's a good way to set a default value there. And then functions, you don't need to return values, but they're very helpful when you do. So just like that coffee analogy, you want to return something, so in there you get actual coffee. Here, a good example is when you want to do like a math function, and here you're just adding 2 integers together. So if you run that function sum, you would get the value of that. So it's just more examples of the same function. Any questions? And that's pretty much it for that. I was thinking if you guys want to, there should be the next assignment on the repository where you can fill out some of these examples that I went over. And then once you guys finish, we can go over the next portion of it. But I guess everybody's good.